timeline for Mr. Graham, and this is
This. Oh hey. And this is.
This is Mike. My name is Michael Hawkins, for those of you who don't know me, and it's Dan. Dan too. Dan.
Mike.
Introduce yourself, Dan.
Okay. I'm Dan Jenkins. And we're doing a timeline for Mr. Graham.
Okay, Mr. Graham, we're gonna start our timeline
In a minute.
in a minute.
Oh, great chief. The year is 1756. The British are taking over the colonies. I need your help.
Yes, I can speak for all the tribes except for the Iroquois. We can war from now until 1763. 7 years.
7 long years.
Because otherwise it's bad luck. Old Indian kind of thing. Yeah.
This is CRAP News coming to you live at 6 o'clock. This is August 4th, 1775, and we're going to be recapping the American Revolution. And this is our host, Dan, and I am Mike. 1778 is the date. Excuse me. Dan, how about starting us off?
No.
And we're going to be starting with me. Well, let's start with the French and Indian War. What was that anyways?
It was a war, Mike.
It was a war, wasn't it?
Yep.
And it was fought from 1763 to 1756 to 1763, excuse me. And well, the French and Indians just did not get along. It was a battle between France, Britain, and
We're allies.
the North American continent. Well, Dan just gave me some good news. Dan, how about telling?
Well, Mike, not to contradict what you just said, but the French and Indians were allies against the British.
Thank you for bringing that point up, Dan.
And they were
Because-
also fighting for control of the colonies, which the British were slowly taking over from the French. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Dan.
No problem,
Well,
Mike.
It sounds like Dan said it all, so let's move on to number 2.
Moving on. The Navigation Acts were passed by the British. They were an act which restricted commerce to only English ships, allowed British the rights to everything the colonies produced and manufactured, and they did not allow any colony trade with any country other than Britain and the fellow colonies.
Good point, Dan.
Back to you, Mike.
Well, here's a point for you. Food costs money. Yes. Number 3, Dan. No.
The Townshend Acts were a light import duty tax on glass, lead, paper, and tea. They were paid at the port to eliminate expected opposition which the British thought the colonies would have.
Exactly my view, Dan. And now back to me. Have you ever said anything? Have you ever heard about the Proclamation Act of 1763?
Wasn't that something where they proclaimed something in 1763?
Yes, you are correct. It was a proclamation was intended to reduce conflict between the settlers and the Indians in the western lands. It ordered the settlers to withdraw temporarily from all lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The proclamation also reserved certain lands for the Indians. That's what it was. And Dan, what are you doing?
Taking notes, Mike.
Taking notes. No. No. Folks, he is not taking notes. He is not taking notes. We're going to bring this before the board. Dan?
I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah. Another word for you. Let's go with soap. It really cleans. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the Sugar Act. It was 1764, or the Sugar Act. I think it was something that had to do with sugar. It was intended to raise money to help pay expenses of a lot of things. They hoped it would reduce taxes for citizens in Great Britain. But
Mike, I do believe it was a tax increase on the colonies so that the people back home in Britain would not have to pay quite as much.
Thank you, Dan. Another good point.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Buy.
Yes. Yes. All right. Let's move on to number 5, too. The year again was
Quit saying the number, dude.
1764. 1764.
Once
And
again, Mike.
the Currency Act. The Currency Act. What was it? It was an act of currency. Parliament passed the Currency Act forbidding the colonies to issue their own paper money. They also required that the colonies must pay all taxes in gold and silver coin rather than in paper money. The Currency Act of 1764 favored Great Britain. Now, that just sounds like they are just being a little, just a tad, a bit on the greedy side, if you ask me.
You're right, Mike.
A little on the greedy side.
It's okay, Mike.
In other news, actor Ronald Reagan is starring in a new play. How about a word from our sponsor, Dan?
Matches. They're hot.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. How about the Quartering Act? I think it had to do with something quartering. We'll find out. The Quartering Act of 1764 required the colonial authorities to provide supplies for British troops stationed in America. Does that cover it?
Yes, Mike.
Yeah? All right. Dan, let's go on to you.
The writs of assistance was something used by the British that was something like a search warrant that the custom officials used to search anywhere. The writs of assistance was a series of search warrants issued by the British to custom officials that gave them the ability and the right to search anything, anywhere, anytime, which is usually not something you can do with a search warrant. In 1767, Parliament, the British Parliament that is, declared the writs legal, but all the colonists opposed them, and they were seldomly used.
Thank you, Dan.
Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome, Mike.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the Boston Tea Party. It was on December 16th, 1773. Did you know that?
That it was.
Radicals, such as John Hancock, Paul Revere, and Samuel Adams, they were great men, and bearing the tea must be sent on to England without payment of any at all.
Mike, I do believe what happened during the Boston Tea Party was a number of colonists who opposed a new tax
Yes.
that raised the tax on everything,
Yes.
believed that that should not be happening, so they disguised themselves as Indians, who the British were having a number of problems with throughout the colonies, and
Did
raised.
they dump the tea into the harbor?
Well, Mike, they raided the ships, took all the tea, and dumped it into the harbor.
Yeah.
made a big
splash.
of tea.
Yes, a big batch of tea, I bet it did. I bet the Sugar Act would have helped then. Really sweetened it up a bit, don't you think?
Yeah, Mike.
Yes. Yes. And, Dan, today General Washington gave an address. 13964 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue.
The colonists formed a committees of correspondence in 1773, which was a committee that kept in touch with other New England districts in their struggle to uphold the colonists' rights. The first committee was appointed in Virginia.
Dan, this just in. We have some coverage from the Boston Tea Party.
Oh, the tape has gotten in.
Yes, the tape has gotten in.
We should go to that footage.
Yes, let's go to the footage.
We're going to that footage
Yes.
right now.
We're gonna be going to the footage as soon as someone turns off the camera.
We're going to the footage right
As soon as
now.
someone pushes no.
No, we're going to that footage.
I'm just gonna get up and I'm gonna.
No. Shh. We're on our way to that footage.
Yes, push that button right there. Yes.
We're on. And here you can see the colonists.
They're very heinous, aren't they?
Yes, they are, Mike.
Wow.
I mean, look at the way that they.
Fight.
Yes, the British are also. Oh,
Wow.
oh,
Wow. Look at that.
a stunning toss by Godzilla.
Yes. They have some.
And you can see the ship with the tea. Oh, hey, all the ships that held the tea were quickly dispatched with.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back
And
to
something else.
yeah. Ah, Godzilla's in Tokyo.
It's okay, Dan. Dan, come out, man. It's okay. This isn't something to be alarmed about, folks. It'll be okay. All right. Wasn't that some footage of the Boston Tea Party?
That it was, Mike.
Yes. And great footage it was.
That it was, Mike.
Yes. Now let's move on to the Boston Port Bill.
Shall we?
All right. It was passed in Parliament in 1774. It paid for the defense of the colonies. It did a lot of stuff. Tax on licenses of all kinds, college diplomas, playing cards, newspapers, advertisements, legal documents.
Mike, I do believe that the Port Bill was a tax on all parchment and written goods such as paper.
Yes, paper. see, paper, is cards,
Yes, Mike.
all that good stuff. All right, and that's what the Port Bill was. Do we still have that bill today?
No, Mike.
I didn't think so. Did you?
No, Mike.
Okay. Dan.
Also in 1774 was the first Continental Congress.
It was.
Which met on September 5th. The colonial rebels and moderates came together to discuss possible courses of action against the British forces. They decided to break away from Britain, and that was when the Continental Association was formed, which supervised a economic war as sort of bias against the British by cutting off trade with them. And in other news, today astronomers predicted stars for tonight.
Yes, I agree with you. And now a word from
Our man in the field.
our man in the field, Mr. Lemon. The Stamp Act of 1775.
Mike,
Yes.
I can see your lips moving.
No, that's Mr. Lemon's. It attempted to raise revenue.
But Mike, It's not Mr. Lemon. You're talking.
No, it's Mr. Lemon, Dan. Look closer. To pay for the defense of the colonies.
Okay, Mike.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lemon. Let's move on.
On April 19th, 1775, was the Lexington and Concord conflict, which has also been labeled as the shot heard round the world, which is basically the first shot of the Revolutionary War, and started it all, which was led by the now called colonies, which are now called the United States of America, which later, as we all know, became one of the world's leading powers.
WWF.
No, Mike.
No?
No.
Sorry. All right.
And on May 10, 1775, was a second Continental Congress. The Congress had met for a second time in excuse me, Mike,
Yes.
for a second time in Philadelphia, and resolved that the colonies were all in a state of defense because of the rebel forces which were fighting the British in Boston at the time.
I agree, Dan. The Declaratory Act. The Declaratory Act was passed by the Parliament in 1776. The Parliament said that they had full power and authority to make laws to bind the colonies and people of America.
Yes, Mike.
Yes, I feel the same way.
Are
Back to
you-
you, Dan.
Thank you, Mike. On June 7th, 1776, Lee introduced, Lee, that is Bruce?
No, I don't think it was Bruce.
Well, anyways, Lee was a man who introduced a resolution that said, these United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. They are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. The adoption of this resolution was on July 2nd of 1776 and was a signal for American independence. Back to you, Mike.
Let's move on to probably the most important of them all. The Declaration of Independence.
Oh, Mike,
What?
one point before you get to that.
Oh, okay.
Before there was a Declaration of Independence, there was the Committee on Independence.
Yes. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it was a committee. And, I think I was wrong, Mike. Back to you.
All right, Dan. Let's move on to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was declared in 1776. This document declared the nation's independence for 200 years, its noble ideas and remarks. Remarkable. Dan, what's this word?
Mike.
Eloquence?
No. Elephant, Mike.
Eloquence have inspired freedom-seeking people all over the world. Dan, does that make you want to say we, the people?
No, Mike.
No?
No.
Well, that about wraps up our news.
No, it doesn't, Mike.
No?
Back to me again.
Back to you, Dan.
Committees on Independence. On July 7th, 1776, just three short days. How many days was it, Mike?
3 short.
After the signing of the Declaration, Congress appointed a committee that would prepare an appropriate statement that would help the Declaration of Independence gets signed by the British.
Yes. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome, Mike.
Well, Dan, that about
Wraps it up. We're out of here.
wraps up the news. And
Technical
One-
difficulties.
yes, one more point. Mr. Graham, you're a stud.
Yeah.
You're a stud. How big of a stud are you?
Whoa, he's big. Big.
Whoa.
Mighty.
You know that point you made about if you gave us to let us do this over the weekend, that we'd wait till the last minute?
The last minute,
I'm about ready to go to bed. It's about what, 10 o'clock?
roughly.
But guess what? It's not Sunday.
Not at all.
It is Saturday.
Mike, it's Sunday in Japan.
Yes, it is. So see, you could say we were waiting till Sunday, but
It wouldn't work. Not here, buddy.
no. So when you think back next time, you think of Mike and
Dan.
we did not wait till the last second.